This is Bloomberg Crypto, a daily Bloomberg iHeart podcast, and I'm Stacey Marie Ishmael, managing editor of crypto for Bloomberg News. It's Friday, December 23rd. It's been another wild week in crypto, especially if your name is Sam Bankman-Fried. The crypto founder and former CEO of FTX has been spending time in a Bahamian jail after having been denied bail related to multiple serious criminal charges. On Tuesday, he signed documents formally agreeing to be extradited to the US to face the courts there about those allegations. And on Wednesday, a Bahamian judge approved that petition. So what that means is, we're at a stage of this ongoing FTX crypto winter that's about to get even more interesting. We'll talk about those latest developments here, as well as what's playing out at Binance, which is by far the largest crypto exchange in the world by volume. To help me contextualize all of the big stories this week, I am delighted to be joined by my colleague, Bloomberg editor Beth Williams.
What we're seeing is the depressed crypto prices combined with high energy costs are really squeezing Bitcoin miners.
Beth, so I feel like Sam Bankman-Fried is running our lives right now, just in terms of, we wake up every day around the world, look to see what thing has happened in terms of the dissolution of this former crypto empire, whether it's hearings or filings. What's the latest on that?
He will face a slew of charges, criminal and civil, over the implosion of FTX, which appears caused by alleged mismanagement and potential misappropriation of funds. What we'll see is, as the backdrop of these proceedings is going on, there'll be further bankruptcy proceedings trying to get any of that money back, or the crypto back, with investors from very large VC funds and investment funds to small-time investors, all looking and hoping to get the money return that has been locked since the bankruptcy.
It does seem, to your point, that we're at a stage where things might move potentially very slowly, given, that the U.S. court system is now going to have to bring a bunch of people forward, possibly as witnesses. What does that mean for what we might be thinking about in January and onward into 2023?
I think you're right. At least in terms of looking at it in terms of crypto reporting, from the market and company perspective, it had been, as you pointed out, very fast-paced, very much development after development in terms of FTX's implosion, and then these criminal charges, and then Sam Bankman-Fried getting arrested. And now it's not that things won't proceed, but they sort of shift into a new phase where we're looking at sort of how it plays out in the legal framework. And as we've seen in past instances in crypto and elsewhere, it can take a bit of time. In terms of the crypto world, we are still looking at potential contagion and where these events will lead in terms of potential regulation, which should be a big theme going into 2023 after what we've seen this year.
And one of the companies that we've been covering in that context is really a company that was around before FTX, and that's Binance, right, which is the world's largest exchange. And, Binance over the past several months has been under a lot of scrutiny for a couple of reasons. One, the feud between Sam Bankman-Fried and the Binance CEO, who goes by CZ, really spilled into public on Twitter. And, you could definitely point to kind of a timeline of how this very interpersonal battle between these two crypto titans or former titans had major consequences for the rest of the market. But what are people worried about with Binance? Why have they been facing, in some weeks withdrawals? What are some of the issues that they're dealing with in terms of their reserves? And how have they been trying to, as they would put it, defud the speculation around them?
There was a feud happening between SBF, as Sam Bankman-Fried's known, and CZ at Binance. And coming out of this implosion of FTX, you have Binance and CZ saying, we're not like them. Our balance sheet is clean and you can trust our exchange. But the problem is with crypto and with Binance in particular, there's a lack of transparency in exactly what they have or what they own. We don't know. We don't even know where they're based. They have many different affiliates around the world, but no particular place that they call home. Even though CZ would seem to set himself apart from something like FTX, plaguing Binance that plagued FTX, if you're from an investing standpoint, you don't know what Binance is doing with your crypto. You only can take what CZ says, and you have to, believe it or not. And after we've seen, collapse after collapse this year, culminating in Sam Bankman-Fried, which were preceded by reassurances that ended up not being true. When we hear this from CZ and Binance, we wonder as well. He also faces several other charges related to money laundering. And so I think all of these things lead one to say, fool me once, shame on me, Not that we'll be fooled by Binance or CZ, but it causes investors to take pause. And that's why you're seeing some withdrawals from exchanges. Investors just don't know who to trust.
Right. And, just to kind of reiterate and recap what you're saying, there's no evidence that Binance isn't fine. The problem for some more skeptical investors is that they've also not presented any evidence that they are fine, right? Like this is the kind of the tension around the fact that crypto and the crypto industry is like, you can just look at the blockchain and see what we're up to, which only works up to a point, and that point stops when it's like internal company financials. And so there's been this outpouring of requests for, should crypto companies be formally audited, right? Like, should they really have to go through much more rigorous reviews and scrutiny as it relates to their financial health in an attempt to give investors a little bit more reassurance? And interesting fact, Binance had retained an accounting firm, not to do an audit, but to at least say, kind of provide a statement of like, yeah, this looks fine as far as we can tell. And that firm, Mazars, sometimes pronounced Mazars, depending on the side of the Atlantic that you're on, have now decided they're just not going to do any crypto stuff anymore. In a very short amount of time, they went from being introduced as, the accounting firm for KuCoin, Binance, a couple of others, and then they were like, oh, nope, we've changed our minds. Which, again, is not the most reassuring thing to happen in crypto this year.
Right. And as you point out, even what they were providing was not a complete snapshot, but it was something. And it raises an interesting question just in terms of accounting. You can sort of understand. It's fascinating. You've got crypto companies that want these so-called proof of reserves, which is a way of showing at least the assets they have at a snapshot point in time, if not a full picture. And then you have accounting firms where perhaps maybe there's a lack of transparency that they can't even get through that makes them perhaps pause before they want to proceed on this work.
I want to talk about the World Cup just very briefly because I feel like we have to, because that final match was wild, and also because there was an absolutely stunning photograph of, Messi celebrating, scoring a goal, and then in the background you just see crypto.com. Because again, it wasn't a major sporting event in 2022 unless there was some kind of sports sponsorship. And our colleague Carly Wana, who has been on this podcast before, had written previously kind of the curse of some of these crypto sponsorships. Like what, just as the person who edits our wonderful crypto newsletter, what did Carly write for the newsletter as an update to that after the World Cup final?
She was talking about sports sponsorships and how, FTX was one of the biggest sports sponsors. Tom Brady, Steph Curry, all over the Super Bowl, which was started the year on a little bit of a brighter note. They've had to backtrack a bit, and the sports teams affiliated with them and organizations have also severed ties. That made it a little bit more challenging for some company like Crypto.com to gain a lot of enthusiasm and gained attention, but maybe not the same kind of mojo as it might have otherwise. And what she was wondering in the newsletter is we've seen sports sponsorship deals decline pretty precipitously from the first half of the year. So I find it fascinating just looking at the year in crypto from the sports angle. You look at the bookends of the Super Bowl, which was called by some the Crypto Bowl, and football.
Or the Super Bowl of crypto.
Yeah. American football is something I know a little bit better than the other kind. But then you have the other kind where, Crypto.com is sort of an afterthought, or maybe it gives people a little heartburn when they see it, actually.
And as you are a person who also is a big baseball fan, what's going on with the Washington Nationals? Are they still sponsored by Terra and Luna?
As far as I know, and Terra is, last I saw, was you could see it on some of their luxury seats. And that was quite something in the spring, as that was the beginning of the baseball season. And that was the beginning of the major collapses of 2022, the Terra implosion that caused this wave of contagion that ultimately ended up with the collapse of FTX.
We'll be right back with more of the week's top stories, and you'll hear more from Bloomberg Deputy Editor for Crypto, Beth Williams. Beth, we've talked about exchanges, but one of the other players in this market, and not just a player, like an essential part of the ecosystem, are, of course, the Bitcoin miners. And I feel like our colleague David Pan probably didn't expect to spend most of his year writing about how bad the financials of so many of these companies were. Just this week, we had yet another Bitcoin miner file for bankruptcy. Like, what's been going on over there?
When I think of miners, I think of distressed when it comes to crypto. This week, we saw Core Scientific, which was one of the biggest Bitcoin miners, file for bankruptcy after warning that it was under distress. What we're seeing is the depressed crypto prices combined with high energy costs are really squeezing Bitcoin miners. And then, of course, you've got a backdrop of an increasing interest rate environment, so that any kind of financing is going to get more expensive. You add that all together, and it's just a grim environment for miners. And we even saw another major miner called Greenidge also warn that it may be headed down that path. It's trying to do a debt restructuring. But a lot of these do have debt. So you've got debt, you've got high costs, and you've got low Bitcoin prices. It's a very bad combination.
And a lot of these folks borrowed money from other players in the crypto ecosystem who are themselves kind of facing distress. And, that kind of brings us back to this idea of interconnection. We've just published sort of a year in review, year in crypto that was really defined by two graphical elements. Shout out to our colleagues who worked on this for several weeks. And one of the things that really struck me is you could really see those interconnections, right? Like how you go from a Terra Luna collapse to a Three Arrows collapse to everything happening with FTX and then a bunch of names scattered in between. Does that concentration surprise you, given that, when you were coming into crypto, everybody was like, it's all decentralized. There's no one single point of failure.
It does surprise me. But it also, I guess, in a way doesn't, because even though it is meant to be decentralized, it's meant to, there was supposed to be this mainstream appeal, trying to bring in sort of the little guy, the little investor. It is very concentrated. It always was very concentrated. And I think even some of the Bitcoin whales, you could see that ownership of some of the bigger tokens is very concentrated. This is something I found out over time. It's an all for one. We're all in it together, sort of, in some ways. And some of these big players, they relied on each other, even though they sometimes point fingers at each other. There's a lot of egos involved. But at the end of the day, there's this sort of faith that they all had in this sort of new thing. And as long as everybody had that faith and everyone was still willing to keep it going, it all worked great. And then as soon as there was a little bit of crack showing, it's stunning how quickly it all unraveled.
So I am not at all persuaded that everyone in crypto is in it together just based on like public statements of CEOs going on Bloomberg TV and saying that other CEOs are complete criminals and should be in jail immediately. That's another thing that doesn't seem to have reassured a lot of retail investors about what's going on in the market.
In some ways, and perhaps this is just my own opinion, but it's sort of a lack of maturity in dealing with business. This is business. It had become multi-billion-dollar business. It's not a sandbox, but I think some of these executives treated it that way. Mm-hmm. Or they felt that they could make these comments, but there would be no consequences. And I just think there's a lot more in the sort of traditional business environment and world. There's a sense of how you comport yourself. There's a sense of how you communicate. There's a sense of even how you compete. And it's just totally warped and different in crypto, such that sometimes in, quote, competing or communicating, they end up sabotaging or self-sabotaging.
You've just made me think, kind of as a closing thought, about an episode we did earlier this year in which we talked to a person who's an executive recruiter for like very senior positions, right? Like, you know, the C-suite on. And one of the things that she said is there's a time and a place for different kinds of CEOs. Like sometimes in the beginning, you want to have that CEO who's got that big personality and is a trash talker and is super competitive. But that's not necessarily the CEO you want if you are being called to testify on Capitol Hill or, you know, have to be in repair and clean up and restore credibility and confidence mode. And so I think it'll definitely be interesting to see in 2023 whether any of these folks either hire media consultants or executive coaches, or if we see another round of executive shakeups in the way that we did in the summer.
This is true. We were even talking about that before, as you say, in the summer, before even what happened with FTX. We saw a number of C-suite executives depart or be replaced. And the thought that we had going forward was that, again, yes, if this industry is to mature, perhaps a new skill set needs to be used to get the industry to that next level. We'll see if it happens.
Yes, it's like the famous closing words of journalists. Well, you know, too early to tell, but we'll see. Thank you, Beth. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thanks.
You can find more of Beth's work on the Bloomberg Terminal, on Bloomberg.com, and on Twitter. And Beth is the main editor for the twice-weekly Bloomberg Crypto newsletter, so you definitely want to sign up for that. This is Bloomberg Crypto, a daily podcast from Bloomberg and iHeartRadio. For more shows from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Send us your comments, questions, or suggestions for the show to crypto@bloomberg.net. The supervising producer of Bloomberg Crypto is Vicky Vergolina. Our senior producer is Janet Babin. Our producers are Mohammed Farouk and Sharon Barrero. Our associate producers are Ty Butler and Moses Undum. Desta Wonderad is our engineer. Original music by Leo Sidran. I'm Stacey Marie Ishmael. Have a great weekend.